Hi folks, Nick Muldoon here from Easy Agile, and thanks for joining us for Easy Agile Live. I'm super excited to introduce Richard to you in a minute, but before we do, I just wanted to share a bit about who we are and what we do. So Easy Agile, we make apps for Atlassian and Jira, and our purpose is to help teams and indeed help organizations realize the benefits of being agile. We know it's not always an easy journey, and it can be a bit challenging sometimes. And so with Easy Agile Live, we're bringing together guests from our community to share some of their experience and their suggestions on how you can be more effective and realize the benefits of Agile in your own team and your own organization. Now, we had 240 odd attendees here today, so we've turned off mics and cameras. But if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat below, and we'll get to those shortly. Before I introduce Richard, I must also do an acknowledgement of country. Easy Agile is an Australian company, and we have team members up and down the east coast here of Australia. And today we are broadcasting to you from the traditional lands of the Dharawal-speaking country. And so I just wanted to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also extend that same respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations folks that are joining us today for this Easy Agile Live. So, Mr. Richard Cheng. Earlier this year, Richard delivered a session at the Scrum Gathering in Portland, and it was how to Ted Lasso your retrospective. And I think we've all been quite, maybe I shouldn't say all, maybe just me, quite impressed by this way that Ted Lasso approached his coaching engagement at Richmond FC. And so it was really a resonant kind of session that Richard shared at the Scrum Gathering in Portland back in May. And so we wanted to get him on to share a little bit more about his thoughts and experience with running effective retrospectives. Richard and I were also just reminiscing before about Agile 2010. And Agile 2010 was hosted at Disney World in Florida. At the Epcot Center was where the big reception dinner was. And then we had free reign, this is going back over a decade now, but we had free reign to run around Epcot and go on the rides and all that sort of stuff after hours. And it was a great experience. And it was just nice to reflect on how far the Agile community and Agile journeys and transformations that large companies have come over that past decade. So to Richard, and Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Richard Cheng is the founder of Agility Prime Solutions, and Agility Prime Solutions provides training and coaching for Agile practices across North America. Richard is a certified Scrum trainer, so he's been doing this for a long time, and he's got deep real-world experience as well. So he's worked in federal government with the Office of Personnel Management, the Department of Defense. He's worked in large publicly listed companies and the NASDAQ, and he's also worked at smaller, perhaps more agile companies that don't have as much history, like Dashlane and Motley Fool. So it's with great honor that I get to welcome Richard today. Thank you so much for joining us, Richard.
Thank you for having me, Nick. I had a great time, and thanks everyone for attending today.
And so what are some of these techniques, that you've kind of honed over the last few years to bring this positive retrospective to life?
Sure, I can give you a very simple one. And so one of the techniques that I'm using right now that I like a lot is the concept of good and better. So the concept here is in the retrospectives, we identify, all right, as a team, what are some things we're doing well? That's good. But as a team, what are some things we can be doing even better? Right. And I phrase it that way, and here's why. In the past, one of the most popular techniques I've seen is a variation of that, where it's pluses and deltas, or pluses and minuses, pros and cons, even pluses and deltas, right? But the problem is the word con and minus and delta not so much, but words con and minus have a slightly more negative connotation, right?
Yeah.
And my concern is because it has a more negative connotation, the team either may consciously or subconsciously not put notes in that minus or con column. But by using a term like pluses, good and better, both words are positive, right? We have the good side and the better side. What are we doing that's good? What can we be doing even better? And because both of the perspectives are positive, I'm hoping that either consciously or subconsciously, incentivizes our teams or promotes it creates an opening for our folks to give us that feedback. So that'd be one example. The presentation I gave in Portland, there's some slides to it that's available on my SlideShare, and you can see more there, but that'd be one example. And I have others if you want to go through a few more.
I think I just want to dive into this good, better one a little bit, because I guess what you're touching on there is if it's a con or if it's a negative and people aren't sharing things, it makes me think of the modern agile movement and the psychological safety. And so is it the framing of the good and better? You know, it's giving people license to kind of talk about the ambition. You know, you've got your good, which is the health, and you've got the better, which is your ambition. And that reframing is just making it a safe space. Is that kind of what you see?
Yeah, I like the word you use, reframing, because that's exactly it, right? Because the concept of better versus a con, it's actually not that dissimilar, right? But we reframed it in that instead of thinking about this is something that's bad, it's reframing it to how can I improve, right? So the con is this is bad. The better is how do I improve this? And so even then we're thinking about the positivity, the action, the next step. And so it is reframing it is exactly it. It's reframing it is a great way to put it.
And so is there another practice that you're leveraging a bit at the moment? You know, I just think back to like your experience with public company or government. You know, is there a practice that you've felt is more appropriate for one kind of audience versus another?
Well, I would say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
I would say that it's less about the organization, but more about the situation. And so there's certain situations where I would do different things. If I can give you a couple examples. So years ago, I was a coach at a small startup where things went horribly wrong. Horribly wrong. Nothing got done that sprint, and the team was livid. They were awing at each other. And I was actually mentoring the Scrum Master there, who was a newer Scrum Master. And so Scrum Master calls me up one day, almost in a full-blown anxiety attack, stressed out because there's a retrospective, and the Scrum Master legitimately was worried that it was going to be a complete mess. They're all going to scream and yell at each other, and even said, you know, I'm kind of worried they might even get physical. And so I said, all right, well, let's talk about how we can approach this retrospective. And so in that retrospective, what we realized is the team had a very negative mindset going in because the sprint went so bad. So here's what we did. What the Scrum Master did is the Scrum Master, before the retrospective, went to each team member individually and said, hey, can you do me a favor? For this retrospective, what we're going to talk about is if at the end of the sprint, things went really well, where we finished all of our commitments and we completed everything, what did we do differently to make that success happen? And so what the Scrum Master did is went to each team member individually with that one-on-one conversation before getting to the retro. And so that, and the Scrum Master said, hey, so when you think of that, can you bring those notes in the retro, and then we'll talk about that in the retrospective. The reason why that was positive was everyone, all the team members going in at first had this really negative, upset, downtrodden mindset. But by having this conversation, it's going to force them to reframe the mindset into what does success look like and how do we get there. But the other benefit we saw there is because the Scrum Master is doing it one-on-one, what it allowed the Scrum Master to do then was to work with that individual team member to let them kind of vent, express their frustrations in a kind of one-on-one environment, just to let them kind of say, well, no, I can do this, but here's what's really bothering me right now. And it still allows them to vent in the one-on-one conversation so that they have that kind of at least somewhat out of their system. And then go into the retrospective, they have a bunch of notes on how we can be successful. And that really helped reframe the mindset going in. So that'd be an example of where we use a specific technique for a specific situation.
I love that. I want to ask the audience, if you feel this is a psychologically safe space, folks, and if you feel comfortable sharing with Richard and I, it'd be great if we could just get a +1 if anyone's ever had a screaming match or nearly a screaming match in a retrospective. It'd be fascinating to see. Can I just ask, was that the worst retrospective experience you've ever had?
Well, that one wasn't the worst because
okay,
we were able to reframe it, right?
Okay.
But
it came good.
Sorry?
It came good.
Yeah, it came good is correct. But I do a lot of training. And so some of the stories my students share with me, now I haven't seen this as much, although I have seen a little bit, but one of the biggest issues I encounter is just getting the team to open up. We're in the retrospectives and it's crickets. Hey team, what went well, what didn't go well, and it's crickets, right? Where the team isn't engaging in retrospective. And so that's challenging. If that happens, as a Scrum Master or as a person running the retrospective, what we have to figure out is, why is there silence? Is it because there's not a sense of safety, right? Is it because the wrong people in the room, where our managers or leaders and they're watching us? Is it because as team members, we're just introverted? So when that happens, it's to identify, why is it crickets? I see in the chat someone saying crickets is my biggest challenge. The key here for Cheryl and anyone else that encounters this, number one, identify why that is. Because once we know why that is, we can take next steps. I'll give you an example. One of my government clients, OPM, there was a program manager who was an executive. Actually, the person was super nice guy, very warm and welcoming, but he was an executive. So he sat in the retrospectives and the team just wouldn't talk. And so I told him, I said, hey, look, you being in there affects the room. And so because you're in there, the concern is half the team members won't speak because you're many levels above them. And the other concern is the people that do talk, right? I'm worried that they're showboating and just showing off to try to get your attention. And all that is detrimental. And so that's why in the retrospectives, we want it to be developers, Scrum Master, product owner only, and no one else. Right? Now I can see in the chat, people are saying part of it is introverts. With introverts, there are techniques to kind of pull the introverts out. If you're doing this live in person, one technique is to do something called silent writing, where instead of talking about it, you can write your thoughts down on Post-it notes and then stick them up on the wall, and then the Scrum Master kind of reviews all the notes. What I like about that technique is, one, it kind of helps create a bit of a safety, because I'm just going to write it and put it out, and so it creates a bit of safety because I'm not saying it out loud. But the other thing I like about that is, what I notice with team dynamics is, on teams I've worked with in the past, I have some team members that will always speak in group settings. I have other team members that will almost never speak in group settings, and a lot of team members are somewhere in between. And so what happens is, when I do retrospectives purely as a kind of a spoken group setting, the danger is I always hear from the same voices, and there's other voices I never hear of, and a lot of people might be somewhere in between. By doing silent writing as an example, we can use nonverbal techniques to get the data points out there that helps even out all the voices in the room. Another way, kind of extension of that, is as a Scrum Master, I can collect the data points ahead of time, so it's kind of already coming in. And there's tools you can use, even within Team Rhythm, the Easy Agile tool. There's ways to kind of put the notes in beforehand, so we have them ready for us to go as we get in, as an example.
I'm just thinking, Richard, about the psychological safety piece. If we come back to that,
sure.
One of the techniques I think that you'd mentioned in the past, maybe back to May, was like and it's kind of what you were talking about before, like having that one-on-one conversation even before the retro starts. But is it advisable to get, like a health score on a Post-it just privately, to the person that's facilitating, just at the start of the retro, to understand where everyone is?
That's not a bad idea. There are many different techniques, and so doing that is great. In fact, there's something called a team radar that I like. Let me show you. Let me see if I can show you. Give me 1 second here. This was not from the TED. I've given several retrospective talks before, and so this one's actually from a slightly different retrospective talk, but let me highlight this as well. Give me 1 second, because what you're talking about is something that that is very we've had some experience with. So let me find the right window here. So can you see this screen? Whoops, let me stop that share. 1 second. Okay, I think we're in the right share. Do you see the team radar in the screen?
Yes.
So what you have here is, this is kind of the concept you're talking about, is coming in. I can do, so here what you do is you give your team members a survey along 8 different dimensions. In this case, this is just an example. The dimensions are delivering business value, asking and receiving feedback, responding to change, understanding vision goal, planning, applying technical practices, working as a team, continuously improving. And they can rate themselves from 0 to 10. And here's the composite score, let's say in sprint number 1. We can see in sprint 1 that continuously improving and applying technical practices is where we find ourselves a bit light. And so what happens here is this is very easy. You just fill out a little survey, take it, create a spider chart. This is sprint number 1. So then in sprint 5, you can see that we've worked on things and you can see the improvement.
Progression.
Yeah. So doing something like this is great. There's also something called a Nico calendar. This requires psychological safety, but what you do here is every day when you come in, you put a sticker next to yourself. A green face if you're happy, this kind of meh face if you're in the middle, this sad face if you're sad. And by doing that, what you can see is, so if, like on day 7, you can notice there's a lot of red face on day 7. That means something happened on that day. Now, what's interesting about doing this is if you see a row that's red, that means there's something going on with an individual. Red columns mean something's happening at the team level. Red rows means something's happening with the individual level. So that's helpful as well to kind of gauge some of the points you talked about, getting surveys from your individual team members.
I like it. Richard, if we switch gears for a second, I'm trying to think about the impact of the distributed nature of teams these days.
Yes.
You know, we saw for a decade that there was an increasing incidence of distributed teams or distributed team members, remote team members, but now it is very much, you know, a fixture of every team and every company. How does that change the effectiveness of retrospectives, and how much harder does a facilitator have to work to kind of tease out from the introverts or you know, to moderate some of the louder voices in the team to kind of balance and get an effective retrospective occurring?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, oh wait, I kind of lost it. I lost you there for a second. Give me that question one more time because I kind of lost the focus.
Yeah, just thinking about the how does the facilitator create an effective retrospective environment for distributed teams, and how's it evolved?
Yeah, well, so I remember during the height of the pandemic, I remember thinking to myself, you know, the one plus side of this whole pandemic is if this thing happened like 10, 15 years ago, we'd be even more hosed because we don't have the same tool. The tools we have now are actually pretty sophisticated and good. And so the great thing about today's world for distributed teams is the tools we have in place are pretty solid. You know, the Easy Agile tool is great, built on top of the Atlassian platform. Having things like Zoom or Teams to enable the co-location is great. So what we need in place, if we're not together physically, is we need all the tools to enable virtual co-location, which includes, you know, video conferencing, instant messaging. I love an environment and culture where when we're in video meetings, the cameras are on. What I find very challenging is a culture when we're in meetings, the cameras are off. And it's very hard to work with other folks when it's a bunch of blank squares. It's a lot easier when you and I can see each other. Now, with that said, probably one of the biggest challenges I've seen with distributed teams is time zones. In fact, what you have to do is find a time that's going to be effective for all the team members. The other thing I recommend, as much as the budget allows, is what I found is if we can get together physically every once in a while, I think it helps create deeper connections so that when we're virtual, we have that connection of meeting physically. And so as much as the budget allows, try to get our team members together, you know, whether it's once a year, a couple times a year, once every other year, whatever, as much as the budget allows, try to get teams together physically, just so that we have that, build up that relationship in person. So then we have a stronger base of relationship to build off of when we're working virtually.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me because coming out of the pandemic, one of the things, and in the pandemic, we moved to a hybrid friendly or remote friendly kind of model. And coming out of the pandemic, we got into the cadence of having a quarterly catch up that's in person. And so all of the team members fly together and catch up somewhere in Australia every quarter just to build those bonds. And I think one of the things that I kind of reflect on now that we're talking about it, Richard, is the fact that it's the cross-team bonds. You know, because if you're on Zoom with your crew, you know, every day of the week, but you might not spend any time in the kitchen catching up with some other person from some other team. So
Yeah.
I guess that leads me to how do you run effective retrospectives that are positive as well when you want to go, you know, beyond just that one team and you want to go across multiple teams, perhaps in a program or an agile release train? Like, how do you scale that up effectively?
Yeah. So when you having, so one thing I do recommend is if you're doing something like a SAFe or a less or Scrum at Scale or any of the scaling patterns, I think it's important to have retrospective at the team level so it can optimize locally, but it's also important to have retrospectives at the program level or when you have multiple teams work together so we can optimize kind of how we work together across different teams. And so I would still do the team-based retrospective at the end of every sprint, but I would also do kind of retrospectives with multiple teams together on a pretty regular basis. Start maybe once a month and kind of scale up or scale down based on your needs. But with that said, the question is, how do we do that? And so it's a very good question because when you have a team, remember, Scrum team is 10 or less, right? Ideally. And so a Scrum team with 10 or less, we can do a meeting where we can capture, talk about the data real time. When you have a program retrospective that may have more people, I think one of the important parts is collecting data ahead of time. So by collecting data ahead of time, we can then get the data, we can reconcile it, we can do analysis to see, how different teams feel about this. And so collect the data ahead of time. Now, one of the things to do is when I do it at the team level, I try to usually collect the data anonymously, but when I do it across different teams, depending on the safety you have, I still want to be able to attribute the comments back to specific teams, just so I can see if different teams have different perspectives. In fact, if the team members are okay with it, we can also experiment where some of the times we'll collect the data anonymously, but attribute to teams, and sometimes the data won't be anonymous, so we can just see how different folks on different teams feel. But that's something that I have to flesh out with the group to see how comfortable they are with that. Right. Mm. From there, a lot of tools we have can simulate things like dot voting for consensus to identify where things are. We have tools like the Team Rhythm, the Google Docs, whatever, where I can bring in a lot of data. People can give their feedback in the tool. So if I have retrospective with, let's say, 100 people, I can't have all 100 talking at once. It's just not logistically possible. But there's nothing stopping all 100 people from typing all at once. And then we can take a bit of a break, and we can even have breakout sessions where the teams can break out in smaller groups to go over condense it. Yeah, in your teams, look through this, identify the kind of the feedback points that appeal to you most, that you resonate most with you, and highlight those. And so there's ways to kind of structure it where we can. It's kind of a lean concept where we can think big but act small, right? Where we can do it together as a group, but break out in smaller groups to do some working sessions around these data points, issues, improvement capabilities, and solutions.
And just on that, like those breakout groups that you're talking about, you wouldn't be breaking back out into your team. You'd be breaking out into, give me the 10 people across these 10 teams that are interested in this area. Like, so you're using that as another way to build these inter-team kind of relationships and interactions?
Yes and no. So what that means is yes to what you said, but I'd also do the other two, meaning that some of the breakout sessions, I love what you said. I'm going to do it so, hey, members from each team, if I'm a partner from a different team or for virtual, we'll do Zoom breakout rooms so that you're in rooms with different team members. Great. But there are some of these where I think actually it's probably better to talk about a team because each team can talk about, hey, based on what our team does, how can our team deal with this? So some of the breakout sessions will be, like you said, where we're going to troubleshoot, or take kind of a cross-sampling, cross multiple teams to troubleshoot and talk about. Yes, but there'll be some of the talking points where I want you to be back within your own team and talk about how you as a team would address this type of issues. So I'd use a combination of both.
Of both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Richard, one of the questions that's come from Jennifer, Jennifer's asking about this Groundhog Day. Like, how do you stop a retrospective from becoming played out and boring? What are some of the techniques that you use there?
Yeah. So I used to be a Scrum Master at the Motley Fool. Fool.com is a website, their financial advising website. That's easily the best Agile shop I've ever worked at. Back when I was there, they did Agile top down throughout the entire organization. They are very, very good at it. I like working there a lot. And also, as an aside, their game room was better than half the sports bars in town, so that was awesome. And there was free food everywhere, so it was great. But all that aside,
this is all pre-pandemic.
No, this is way pre-pandemic. Although as far as I'm aware, they haven't lost their game.
Haven't changed.
So it's still there.
Yeah. But anyway, sorry. How do you avoid from being boring?
So when I was there for 3 years, and when you give a team at the Motley Fool 3 years together, they get really good at doing things. So towards the end of the year 3, the team was very good. But we didn't stop doing retrospectives. The retrospectives just changed. So because our team was so efficient, you can only squeeze so much juice out of the fruit before there's no more juice to squeeze out. So here were some of the later retrospectives. One retrospective is how we as a team can produce better business value to the organization. That was one retrospective. Another retrospective is how we as a team can get value to our users faster. That was another retrospective. Another one was how we as a team, because we're so effective and efficient, how can we better share some of our patterns across the organization so we can help the other teams grow and become better? That was another retrospective. Another retrospective was within the context of what our team does, what our team builds, how can we make the world a better place? That was another retrospective we had. And so as a Scrum Master, a lot of it is about finding techniques to not make a Groundhog Day, but make each retrospective something that it really resonates to where our team's psyche and mentality is at that time. I'm going to put some links in the chat for some resources that would help with that. So here are some websites that provide some helpful techniques. Whoops, I have in the chat. I copy and pasted, so it might look a little wonky. But Retromat, Fun Retrospectives, Liberating Structures. There's another one called Tasty Cupcakes.
Tasty Cupcakes. Okay.
Yep. Tastycupcakes.org, I think it is. I think it's tastycupcakes.org. Let me type that in here just to make sure that is correct. So, oh, by the way, Tasty Cupcakes, much to my chagrin, had nothing to do with cupcakes. It is a series of interactive techniques that help us work together as teams. So those are all resources you can look at that give you a series of different and fun techniques to use. As well, I saw a note in the chat about the slides. I'll work with the Easy Agile with you folks afterwards to kind of get you all the slides available so you can share with the students. In my slides, I have some techniques broken out as well. But I equate the Scrum Master as almost like a carpenter where no one tool is the best tool. But as a good carpenter, I need a toolbox with a lot of different tools. So given any situation, I can use different tools for that situation. That analogy applies to retrospectives. As a good Scrum Master, I need different retrospective techniques based on where my team is.
This is so okay. So I've got two questions off the back of that, Richard. Is it advisable to have an external facilitator? So a Scrum Master from another team come and facilitate this team's retrospective, and just so that everyone can participate. I guess that's the first question. And the follow-on question is, if you've got an external, kind of independent that's coming in to facilitate a retrospective, how do they read the room quickly? How do they read the room in the first, 5 minutes to figure out which tool out of the toolbox they might want to apply? And how do they be agile to go, oh, well, hang on, this one's not working, but we can recover this and we'll try something else?
Yeah, I love that idea. So I love the concept of having another Scrum Master come in to facilitate retrospective. It changes the dynamics up, brings a different energy. It gives us more insights. I think that's great. What I would recommend in that situation is have your existing Scrum Master work with the kind of the Scrum Master coming in as the guest facilitator, just to kind of prepare them. So, hey, here's my team is, here's the things I've been doing. Here's what I've observed works out well. Here's what I observed, some of our biggest issues we have with our retrospectives. And then based on that, what I do is I bring in a skilled Scrum Master from a different team. They'll say, okay, great, that sounds good. Here's the techniques I've used with my teams I found helpful. And it just brings in a different, maybe set of techniques, a different personality, a different perspective, a different pacing, a different cadence, a different voice, different accent. And so it just helps change up dynamics. I think there's a lot of good to that. I think it's great. And I think to prepare them, what I would do is have the two Scrum Masters meet ahead of time to work through their notes to kind of potentially make it more effective and avoid any potential traps or pitfalls that new Scrum Masters might fall into working with that specific team.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Making sure that they're prepared in advance, they've got the context in advance, and they're not coming in cold.
One of the questions, so I've done this several times. One of the questions I always ask is, hey, on this team, are there any topic areas that are particularly sensitive or sore spots that I should be aware of? That's one question I ask. Just make sure that I don't, because I have done it before. I've actually been, and this was actually a leadership retreat where I accidentally pushed a hot topic button a little too hard that I didn't realize was a hot topic button. And all of a sudden the tone in the room shifted. I'm looked around what did I do? And then someone said, oh yeah, that was a sore topic from a while ago. Here's the history. And I remember thinking, I wish someone would have briefed me before I facilitated a session, because it would have been so easy to avoid it. Ever since then, whenever I facilitate anything, one of the questions I always ask is, are there any hot topic, source subject things that if I bring up can cause potential issues, just to make sure I understand some of the history and backstory with the team and with the personnel in the room.
And you can kind of skirt around those and just avoid them or come at them from
Or if it's important, I can just call it out, right? But what arms me with the information to determine what the next best step is. Some of them I will skirt and avoid if it's not relevant, but some of it's relevant to our performance, I'll have to call out. But I got to figure out a way to call it out in a way that is effective and not distracting.
Yeah, okay. Oh, this is fantastic, Richard. I was just thinking, I've got, there's one question here, T. Gillison. We're coming back to psychological safety. The question is, like, do we start by doing individual or one-on-one retrospectives?
I think there's a lot of value to that. In fact, one of the things I recommend is if we have a problem that's with a specific person, that should always be a one-on-one conversation. And here's the reason. Let's say we're on a team, right? And let's say we have a team where one of the developers isn't following our coding standards. And the first example, let's say it's you, Nick. I'm sure you would follow standards, no problem. Let's say it's you. So here's the danger. The danger is team member A says, as a team, we should all be following our coding standards. Team member 2 says, yeah, I agree. We should all follow the coding standards. And then you, Nick, out of nowhere says, yeah, whoever's doing it, follow the standard. We all look at you. We're all thinking, it's you, Nick.
It's me.
That, right? But it's awkward to say it out loud. So what happens is, from my perspective, whenever the problem is with an individual, I generally don't do that in a retrospective. That's more of a one-on-one conversation.
Okay, I like that. And if you're the Scrum Master, you're going to have that conversation one-on-one. There's no point in having a triangle conversation and bubbling it up to their people leader or their engineering manager.
It's actually very situational, because what I've found over my experiences is what I do when the issue is one-on-one, I actually try to figure out which team member would have the most effective conversation. Maybe there's someone on the team that this person really opens up to. Maybe there's one person on the team that this person really respects. Maybe there's one person on the team this person feels safer around. So if it's me, the Scrum Master, I'll do it. But let's say there's a dev lead, as an example, that I know this person is really close to and will listen to. Maybe I'll have that person do it. And there are times where maybe we'll do it, like maybe it'll be the Scrum Master and dev lead together if we feel like that's appropriate. Now, it might not always be. It might be, I don't want to have that person feel like we're ganging up on them. But if it's something where having more than one voice in the room can help kind of enhance the conversation, then that's certainly a viable option, potentially.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Hey, Richard, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing your time and experience and these tips and tricks with us. I think it's wonderful, and we're all going to take something away from this. Folks on the call, just be mindful. Richard will be putting together and sharing a blog post. We can get copies of slides, and obviously there's some resources that he shared in the chat as well to link you out to Cupcake. Can't think of the name of it now. So there's a few other resources, and we'll bundle it all together, so you'll get a copy of that. Richard also runs an advanced Scrum Master course, so if you want to figure out if you want to go deeper on retrospectives and really hone your retrospective facilitation skills, check out the advanced Scrum Master course that Richard runs through Agility Prime Solutions. I'd like to thank Richard, you, for your time today, and I'd like to thank all of our participants for joining in as well. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Nick. I had a great time, and thanks everyone for attending today.